I wonder if you could briefly summarise why the Church of England has chosen to implement common tenure.
But actually we have in our history a notion of the cure of souls, and that's shared between a parson, a priest who has a freehold, and the bishop who represents the wider church and how their vocation and ministry fits into it. And we're doing two things in this move towards common tenure with the terms of service. One is we're recognising that the patterns of operating vocations amongst the priesthood are changing enormously. So lots and lots of people now do not have a freehold, they have all kinds of other licences. So it's a very complex picture, and technically and legally we're creating a very uneven way of operating. So we need to simplify that and clarify it. But the second reason for doing it is that the whole notion of freehold and then working with the bishop, sharing in the cure of souls, is something we want to recapture, and common tenure will create a partnership which is much clearer, much more simple and much more straightforward between all those in common tenure working in the vineyard, fulfilling their vocations in different places, and then the bishop and his team representing the wider church and trying to support those vocations, encourage them, develop them. And it provides a framework really for that partnership, which is of our times insofar as people do want to know the details and what the rights and responsibilities are, but it's actually recapturing something rather profound and deep about the way priesthood works within a Catholic setup in the church.
What are some of the key changes and benefits that people will actually experience?
There'll be structured conversations through the ministerial development review process, which allows all parties, those fulfilling their vocation, the bishop and his colleagues, to actually engage deeply about the spiritual call, the spiritual opportunities, and the way vocations are unfolding, both for the locality and for the whole church. We need a structured way in which that conversation can happen, and that's ministerial development review. So there's clarity in what's expected of people, a greater clarity, and a common way of expressing that. There's conversation that's structured, and probably most important, there's a structure for difficult conversations. It's very easy in my role, and I know parish clergy, we all do it, there's a pastoral approach to everything. And sometimes you have to look at hard questions. And people do face hard questions in their vocation, from opposition, challenges, complaints, frustrations in themselves and around. And this will provide a framework for us to have those challenging conversations, I think, in a mature and adult way that allows the church, with each person, to discern what's going to be right for their vocation, for the vocation of that place, that parish, that workplace, wherever it is, and the witness of the whole church. So they're the three things really: a greater clarity in what we're about, regular structured conversations for everybody, not just those who happen to bump into the bishop or his team, and a way in which we can have challenging conversations when they're necessary because of difficulties that are arising either within a person or around them, and a fair way of looking at those things and seeking God's guidance as to how best to handle them.
There are some who actually say that this is quite prescriptive and very process driven, and actually somewhere we're losing the very essence of priesthood.
Yeah.
What would you say to that?
It'd be easy to write them off as another bureaucratic enterprise. And of course the world is full of a tick box culture, and with ministerial development review we have forms. So there are signs that people could say, are we just going down the way that the rest of the world goes? Priesthood in its essence is about a partnership between somebody having a vocation to be a public representative minister and the whole church, who through the bishop authorises that ministry, licenses it, and has to care for it and nurture it and be around to help it flourish, and sometimes then to move and flourish somewhere else. Nobody is a priest on their own, you're a priest in the church. And the essence of common tenure is that together we're priests, and together we have these structured conversations, this clarity about what we're trying to do, which will enable, I think, each person to flourish as best they can, the church to step up to be supportive, to be challenging when we need to, and all that to be done together. And all the ways of preparing for this and then operating it will allow priesthood, I think, to be a witness in the church that those whom God calls work in a partnership, operate in a partnership way, and give that sign and example to others. I think in terms of a theological rationale, if you want, we see that God in Jesus actually comes and engages with us in our full humanity, warts and all. And this notion of common tenure and the framework of terms of service actually creates a space for that to happen, for incarnation to take place, for the Spirit to engage with us, challenge us, transform us, and we do it together.
It's clearly a very important change. What is the diocese doing to ensure awareness and understanding?
Well, in the next couple of months, summer and early autumn, there will be some workshops with yourself and Bishop Humphrey to allow people to come, ask their questions, raise issues that concern them, so that together we can craft how we're going to understand this framework and work it to our best advantage in the diocese. Then in October, there'll be a draft statement of particulars which provides an outline really within which jobs will work, rights, responsibilities, things like that. And again, people will then have that information to look at, to discuss with others, to look at in chapter meetings, so that in November at the clergy conference there'll be a clinic type opportunity when anybody can come, and having had those opportunities to engage with some of the detail, both in discussion with yourself and Humphrey, and also by looking at the statement of particulars, at the model that's offered, come to look further at details, concerns, and the whole point is so together, by the time we come to January, when common tenure will begin to operate, we've done all that we can, not just to sign up to somebody else's scheme, but to own it ourselves, shape it so that it benefits us as best it can, and be ready to run with it in January and February when it begins to unroll.
And finally, do you have any other thoughts to offer?
Well, the obvious one is that I hope and pray we can do this in a positive way to try and understand that it helps us inhabit our priesthood more richly, that it helps us make a public witness to how Christians need to work in partnership, be responsible for each other and be adult about the way we operate, the difficult things and the opportunities. I think it can be all those rich things. The temptation for many will be to think this is another bureaucratic exercise that simply reflects what's happening in the world, obsessed with details and a tick box culture. I think we've got to resist that temptation because, as I've tried to say in this conversation, there are far deeper issues at stake, and it is a real opportunity for us, I think, to care for each other better, to work together better, to be realistic about issues we need to face, and to have a framework and a system to do that in, which I think will be fit for purpose. It is reflecting how we operate in our times, but I think it'll be a profoundly Christian way of doing that. So my hope is that we can step up to it with confidence and see it as a spiritual exercise that actually gives a witness to what the kingdom's about.